Alrighty. Good morning, everyone, or hello, everyone. My name is Barrett Jensen. Today, I'm going to be talking about 4 aircraft with running the business. So to start us off, I got my scores here that I inputted for each category. Purchase price, I did a 4. Age was a 2. Value factor was out of 10,000. Cabin volume was a 2. Oh, I'm sorry. The value factor was a 3. I put wing loading was a 2. Payload with max fuel, I put as a 4. Range with max payload, I did a 4. DOC per hour per 300 nautical mile mission, I did a 3. And then maintenance costs, I also did 3. So the 4s I put because I think purchase price is very important when considering transitioning to the aviation business and considering what aircraft to buy, because you don't want to go out of your budget. And you kind of have, there's a lot more factors that go into purchase price, like how much are we going to be using this aircraft? Is it going to be worth it for us to put this much money into an aircraft? Are we going to get the same usage out of this and be just as comfortable in this more expensive aircraft as this cheaper aircraft? Things like that. So I think purchase price is going to be one of the most important categories that a company comes across. And then payload with max fuel, I think, is also pretty important, because you don't want to have to be making a ton of stops in case you had to bring a little bit more luggage than you needed to, or you needed to transport something to another location that you just weren't prepared for. It's better to be prepared and have a higher payload with max fuel than to be unprepared and have a lower payload with max fuel. So I thought that was also pretty important. And then range with the max payload, obviously, I think that goes hand in hand with the payload with max fuel, because you want a longer range with a higher payload with max fuel than rather than making a bunch of stops on the way. You want to just be able to get there and in one trip. And then for my 3s, I did the value factor, the DOC, and the maintenance cost. Maintenance cost I thought was pretty important. Not important enough to be a 4 in this case, I think, but definitely important, because that's something that you're going to need to consider, kind of going hand in hand with purchase price. Is this maintenance cost for this similar priced aircraft going to be a lot higher than this other aircraft? So when comparing different aircrafts, I think that's super important, because you don't want to pay that purchase price and then have to continue to pay a lot of money for maintenance when there's another airplane that's in that similar price range that the maintenance costs a lot less. So I think that's also important for a company to consider. And then for my 2s, I did cabin volume, wing loading, and age. I think age, like, that's kind of important, but not enough to be a 3 or 4, because you can still get a lot of life out of an older aircraft, a lot of miles, and I think it's still important, because, like, you don't want to buy a super old aircraft and then have to, dump it in 5 years. But if you're buying something a little bit on the older side, I think you could still get quite a lot of use out of that. So I think, age is something you should still consider, which is why I put it as a 2, but not as important as the purchase price. So for this graph that I have here, I put the total scores of each of my 4 aircraft, which were the Grand Caravan, Kodiak, the Sky Courier, and the King Air 260. And the plane with the highest score was the Grand Caravan. But the Kodiak and the Sky Courier were very close. So I think if you went with any of those 3 aircraft, I think you're going to be pretty happy. But the Grand Caravan won it this time. And then I also put the purchase price FV on there as well, and the Grand Caravan scored the highest for that too. Yes. So one of the topics that I picked from our chapter this week was organization. I think that's super important when you're approaching buying an aircraft and how you're going to be using it, and the factors that go into buying an aircraft. Like, how should the 3 principal departments be ran? Like the chief pilot, who's going to be reporting to the COO, the administrator who's going to be scheduling the maintenance, stuff like that. I think that's super important to get that nailed down before you go and buy an aircraft. And then who's going to be the aviation manager? Is it going to be the COO? Is it going to be someone else that you hire separately to do that job for you? I think that's something that you need to figure out before you go into buying an aircraft. And yeah, I think I think in this scenario, the organization, the setup should be that the chief pilot, the experienced technician, safety manager, administrator, and scheduler, they should all just go directly to the CEO. I don't think that there's any need for an aviation manager because it's just going to be the COO and CEO that are going to be using this aircraft. So I think it would just, there wouldn't really be a point to go and present that to the aviation manager when, the CEO or the COO, when they're boarding the aircraft, they can just talk to the chief pilot directly right there. And I mean, it's the PIC's job to make sure that the aircraft is airworthy anyways. So they're going to be checking most of the stuff that the experienced technician is going to be going over anyways. So, just getting that chain of command, I think having that organization going into the aircraft, that's going to be super important. And then the verse that I chose for this week was Proverbs 9, verse 10. It reads, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Going into buying an aircraft, you need to have wisdom and not just knowledge. Knowledge is very important, especially considering all the different factors like we talked about. There's a lot of different categories that you have to go over when considering which aircraft you want to pursue and buy. But you have to have the wisdom in order to make that decision. Okay, I'm going to go with this aircraft instead of this aircraft. And I think having that wisdom comes from the Lord. You have to fear the Lord first, and the Lord will guide you, and He will give you that wisdom. And wisdom is much more important than just having knowledge. Yeah, that's all I got for you.